Hey guys, and welcome back to my channel. Today we are looking at this book, Paintings in the Louvre. And as you can see, it once was a library book, but no longer. And that's how it became mine. It's definitely lived a life. You can see how messed up the spine is over here in the binding. But it's full of nice color plates. So I thought we could take a look at it today. Lawrence Gowing recently retired as Slade Professor of Fine Art, London, and probably the most vivid writer in English on painting today, has selected more than 800 European masterpieces for inclusion in this, the most lavish and comprehensive volume ever published on the greatest collection of paintings in the world, the Louvre. Superbly reproduced in full color, here are all of the most important paintings in the Louvre. The works of the great French masters, which amount to over half the collection, are well represented, with paintings by Poussin, Fragonard, David, Géricault, Delacroix, Ingres, and Corot, to name only a few. The Mona Lisa is included, together with a good selection of Leonardo da Vinci's other paintings. Many other great Italian masterpieces are reproduced, from the early gilded panels of Giotto to altarpieces by Fra Angelico, from frescoes by Botticelli to canvases by Veronese, Titian, and Tintoretto, and their successors. Here too are fine examples from the Flemish, Dutch, German, English, and Spanish schools, including Bosch, Dürer, Vermeer, Turner, and El Greco. Gowing leads us through the museum as he would a friend, stopping every few places to tell us, in a short essay, who the people in the painting are, or why an artist painted in a certain style, or how a painting broke new ground and inspired painters who came later. Each of these 115 essays is a miniature treasure, erudite, witty, provocative, enlightening. Unexpected choices appear throughout the book. Through the generous cooperation of the Louvre, the author has had access to paintings that are rarely on public display. Oh, that's cool. So surprises are in store for the art scholar as well as for the general reader. Well, that's us. Unparalleled in its breadth and scope, and unique in the quality of its sumptuous color reproductions, this is the most complete and beautiful volume on the Louvre's collection of paintings ever published, and will undoubtedly remain so for many years to come. Our first reproduction here. Wow, that's a cool one. So I think that the first image was by Jacques-Louis David, Madame Récamier, I think. And they refer to this one as a frontispiece or frontispiece. I don't know. That's not a word I've encountered before. Theodore Chassériau, The Two Sisters from 1843. So I know that we won't be able to get through this entire book in one video, but I thought we could look at a few pages at a time. So this is a little bit about the origin of the Louvre. The Musée du Louvre is about to begin a new era in its long history. After years of alterations and construction, the entire building will be available to the museum, including the north wing, in which the Ministère des Finances is located. The Louvre's extensive collections will be completely redistributed. A vast new underground space, created beneath the Cour Napoleon, will provide a monumental reception area to be surmounted by Ayampé's already famous glass pyramid. So keep in mind this book is over 30 years old, and they're referring now to the Louvre we know today. Under the building's other large courtyard, the Cour Carrée, the foundations of the first royal chateau have now been uncovered, intact and still impressive. Today we can again see that original stronghold, constructed in the early years of the 13th century by Philippe Auguste and modernized by Charles V. Around this powerful symbol of central authority, one of the largest palace complexes in the world, the Louvre, was gradually to develop. The first alterations to the original building were made by Francois I. Although he spent the greater part of his time at Fontainebleau, where his collection of paintings was kept, he wanted to remodel his Parisian residence to create a pleasure palace. He had the original 13th century donjon, or keep, raised in 1528. The basic plan, 4 wings surrounding a square courtyard, remained unchanged, but he transformed the medieval building into a Renaissance palace. First, the west wing was rebuilt by Pierre Lescot with Jean Goujon, responsible for its sculptural details. The fine courtyard facade and the Salle de Caryatide, which was first used in 1558 on the occasion of the marriage of Mary Stuart and the Dauphin Francois, remain as tangible evidence of the work commissioned by Francois I and completed during the reign of Henri II. Beginning in 1566, the south courtyard wing was rebuilt in the same style, and an entirely new main wing, the future Petite Galerie, was added, extending the palace southward toward the Seine. In 1563, Catherine de' Medici, the Queen Regent, commissioned Philibert de Lorme to construct a second palace 500 meters to the west of the Louvre, beyond the city walls, on the land belonging to the royal tile works called the Tuileries. The Grand Dessin, or Great Design, that was to give the Louvre its final shape, was laid down. Henri decided to combine the Louvre and the Tuileries into a single palace by connecting the buildings with a 460-meter-long gallery along the Seine, the Galerie du Bord de l'Eau, or Riverside Gallery, to be named officially the Grande Galerie. The construction was to be supervised by Louis Métezeau and Jacques André du Cerceau the Younger. Quite a name. Plans were also made for enlarging the old Louvre. The wings of the medieval palace were to be doubled in length, thereby quadrupling the area of the Cour Carrée. During the reign of Louis XIV, those extensions, designed by Jacques Lemercier, following the plans of Pierre Lescot and Louis Laval, were built, and they still form the 4 sides of the Cour Carrée. Ambitious plans were also drawn up for the palace's interior decoration. The great painter Nicolas Poussin was summoned back from Rome to paint the vaulting of the Grande Galerie. Today nothing remains of that work, which was never completed. Giovanni Francesco Romanelli painted frescoes, a few of which are reproduced on pages 356 and 357, on the ceilings of the suite of rooms reserved for Anne d'Autriche on the ground floor of the Petite Galerie. On the second floor of the same wing, Louis Laveau, I'm not sure, in collaboration with Charles Lebrun for the paintings and Jacques Serrazin for the sculptures, began decoration of the sumptuous Galerie d'Apollon, which was designed to glorify the young monarch. The Grand Gallery was decorated and furnished with a magnificent series of Savonnerie carpets. At the time, it was generally thought that Louis XIV, who had ordered large-scale work on the Tuileries, with gardens designed by André Le Nôtre, was planning to make the Louvre his principal residence. The royal painting collection was moved from Fontainebleau and installed in the palace. From 1667 to 1670, Laveau and Claude Perrault built the principal or eastern facade, which was to overlook a vast ceremonial square. The sovereign chose a rigorously balanced design, the colonnade, for that facade rather than the more dynamic plan presented by Bernini. The king's choice is often cited as exemplifying classical France's rejection of the Baroque in architecture. Oh, that's interesting. In 1674, Louis XIV decided to establish his official residence at Versailles, which put an end to construction at the Louvre. Some of the wings surrounding the Cour Carrée were left unroofed. The Royal Plaza Square in front of the colonnade was to exist only on paper, and the decoration of the Galerie d'Apollon was not to be completed until the 19th century. The court remained at Versailles until the Revolution, with the Tuileries serving as the king's residence during his brief visits to Paris. I didn't realize that. Thus, the Louvre ceased to be a symbol of monarchy. During the 18th century, however, the abandoned palace took on another and equally rich significance. Among the building's many occupants were the various royal academies. In 1699, the Académie Royale de Peinture et de Sculpture obtained Louis XIV's permission to use the Grande Galerie for a public exhibition of work by its members. The show was a great success. Beginning in 1725 and continuing until 1848, similar exhibitions were regularly held at the end of the Grande Galerie in the Grand Salon, the Salon Carré, which lent the name Salon to those events. Oh, that's interesting. The palace's vocation had become a cultural one, to use a modern term, until their transfer to the Invalides in 1777. The famous models of the towns of France were also displayed in the Grande Galerie, and the king's collection of drawings was installed in the adjoining space. In addition, the vast caravanserai, I don't know, I've never seen that word, of the Louvre provided room for many artist studios, which were visited by hordes of clients as well as the curious. It was not surprising, therefore, that the article in the Louvre in Denis Diderot's Encyclopédie, 1765, should suggest that the building be used for the public display of the royal collections. Not only paintings and sculpture, but also holdings in natural history, medals and decorations, and the aforementioned town maps. So here we have an image from the October calendar page of the Très Riche Heure of the Duc de Berry, with the medieval Louvre in the background here. Louis XIV's Grand Carousel celebrated the birth of his son, the Dauphin, in 1662. Dauphin is French word for prince, and gave the Place de Carousel its name. The festivities took place in front of the Tuileries Palace, which was destroyed by fire in 1871. And this image is a view of Paris, featuring the Louvre. And the caption says, a 17th century view from the Pont Neuf shows the Louvre Palace on the right bank. The buildings of the then unfinished Cour Carrée are closest to the Pont Neuf, and the long Grande Galerie extends down the river. The Tuileries Palace would have extended inland from the end of the Grande Galerie. So we're picking up where we left off, where I think it was Denis Diderot suggested that the building be used for a public display of royal collections, and that the academies be given permanent homes therein. The Louvre was to become a palace of arts and sciences worthy of serving the ideal of progress shared by the partisans of the Enlightenment. As early as 1750, the pressure of public opinion had encouraged two developments in this direction. At the Louvre itself, work on the dilapidated structure was resumed. Limited to Jacques Ange, I think. Gabriel's renovation of the facades overlooking the Carousel, which was partially cleared, and to the creation of a terrace in front of the colonnade. In addition, a portion of the king's painting collection, much of which had long been inaccessible, was hung in the Palais du Luxembourg. The notion of a museum per se was taken in hand by the Comte Angevier, Louis XIV's outstanding director of buildings, who promoted an active acquisition policy for the royal collection. Greatest attention was given to plans for remodeling the Grande Galerie, including overhead illumination, first tried out in the Salon in 1784, large statues to honor illustrious men, and access to the Salon via a monumental staircase. The revolution broke out, however, before the museum's eagerly awaited opening. When the museum's Central des Arts did at last open its doors on the 10th of August in 1793, it was installed in the same shabby, old-fashioned Grande Galerie, simply repaired initially. It was finally completely redecorated during the First Empire, 1805 to 1810, by Charles Percier and Pierre Fontaine, who turned largely to Hubert Robert's old plans, with beamed arches and partial overhead illumination. On the ground floor, Anne d'Autriche's apartments, the Salle des Caryatides, and the south wing of the Cour Carrée provided other rooms that, once refurbished, housed the antiquities collections. This was the dazzling era of the Musée Napoléon, an ephemeral dream museum that was to serve as model for all other 19th century museums. During the Bourbon Restoration, 1814 to 1830, the Louvre entered a period of convalescence. In 1815, its many masterpieces left Paris to return to their homelands. Then came a brief but lively period of acquisition, particularly with regard to the collections of antiquities, sculpture, and objets d'art. On the second floor of the Cour Carré's south wing, a Musée Charlatan, its ceilings ornamented with highly interesting illustrative paintings, was created to house the Egyptian collection. Little large-scale architectural work was undertaken during the reign of Louis Philippe from 1830 to 1848, whose greatest interest was the establishment of the Musée de l'Histoire de France at Versailles. The contents of its incomparable Galerie Espagnole, exhibited at the Louvre, were auctioned in London after the 1848 revolution, to the unending regret of subsequent curators. So during the Second Republic and the Second Empire, this is mid to late 1800s, there was a new era of intense architectural and museographical, that's a new word for me, activity. The Louvre was restored, rearranged, and completed. So this is sort of the transformation of the Louvre from a private palace to a public more public good. The central portion of the Galerie d'Apollon was painted by Eugène Delacroix. which is a review day under the Empire in the Cour du Carousel near the Tuileries Palace, 1810. Napoleon III took a personal interest in the completion of this project, deciding upon plans drawn up by Louis Visconti. They were made an integral part of the Baron Georges Haussmann's urban renewal project for Paris and represented a reaffirmation of the all-powerful state. Yeah, Georges Haussmann is kind of created the Paris we know today in a lot of ways, I think. He oversaw the creation of what are called in Paris the Grande Avenue. So there are some avenues that kind of slice Paris or changed its landscape. Anyway, to the north, along the Rue de Rivoli, the palace was enclosed by a wing that stretched from the Tuileries to the Cour Carrée. The vast rectangle was finally to be completed. New symmetrical wings were built in the inner courtyards to frame the Cour Napoleon. The emperor inaugurated the new Louvre in 1857. But in May of 1871, the last days of the Commune, a fire swept through the Tuileries Palace. The museum next door barely escaped destruction. Although it could have been restored, the Tuileries, symbol of the detested regime of Napoleon III, was razed in 1883. Here's the original Louvre fortress, of which only the foundations remain. The author says it occupied a quarter of what is now the Cour Carrée. Parallel to the riverside Grande Galerie and forming several small courtyards are Napoleon's additions. So the Louvre went from a fort to a palace to a museum. And now when you visit the Louvre, you can see this part here. However, thanks to the vacant space its demolition created between the Pavillon de Marsan and the Pavillon de Flore, today the eye can take in the unique perspective from east to west, which now extends as far as the Arc de Triomphe d'Étoile. As soon as the Louvre ceased being the seat of power, its fate was inevitable. One after another, the administrative offices in the vast palace have had to be appropriated by the museum so that it may continue to house and display its vast collections. First Napoleon III's Salle des États, then the Pavillon Marsan and its wing, turned over to the Musée des Arts Décoratifs in 1905. Next, the Pavillon de Flore in 1969. The Louvre's collections have consistently grown through acquisitions, and it has had to answer to the needs of an ever-growing number of visitors while, of course, striving to improve the presentation of the collections and take advantage of the technological advances in museology. So that was an overview of the Louvre's architectural history. And normally I wouldn't read all of something like that, but I think that the history of the Louvre as a building and a space is pretty interesting. The author says, "It is summed up here on the threshold of this selection from among the museum's paintings to emphasize that these pictures are an integral part of a museum truly unlike any other. To the importance of the Louvre's collections, which can be equaled in wealth and encyclopedic diversity by only 3 or 4 other museums in the world, we must add the importance of the historical building itself, one of those places essential to the undertaking of a country, a society, a culture." And this foreword is by Michel Leclotz from April 1987. And it was translated from the original French. Now we have a history of the collection. image here is captioned with the Grande Galerie at the Louvre between 1794 and 1796. We'll just read a little bit about this part and then we'll look at some images. In France, collecting works of art was thought of as part of kingship. It was inseparable from monarchy, a sport of kings as horse racing is called in England. Collecting was the visible enjoyment of a royal prerogative, and, until the crown was equal to it, a ruler like the Duc de Paris took on the role and its satisfactions. In the early 15th century, the Duke accumulated paintings and tapestries. The illuminated manuscripts he also collected, such as the Très Riche Heures, recorded his enjoyment of his properties. He collected not only art, but artists, and there was no inducement he would not offer to attract desirable acquisitions. He even promised the illuminator Paul de Limbourg a wife. Ahead of his time, the Duke attached to art and artists the importance of standing they were gaining in Italy. In the north, the prestige granted to Italian art and craftsmanship was gradually becoming apparent. The first of these works were regarded as curiosities to furnish collectors' cabinets, but soon the curious spoils and luxurious douceur to be had in Italy became an incentive to military adventure. High Renaissance paintings and copies of them soon began to reach France. At Milan in 1507, the celebrations of Louis XII's triumphant entry were designed by Leonardo da Vinci, who received a royal pension and accepted employment as a military engineer. I didn't realize that about Leonardo da Vinci. In seeking to acquire not only the great pictures, but the presence of the master himself, Louis XII was following the habit of the Duc de Paris 100 years before. The most notable image of the French Renaissance was to be the self-image of the king himself. Francois I was truly a man of universal attainments, a patron and a general, who was in both roles worthy of his antagonist from Urbino, the Duke Federico da Montefeltro. Apologies for my Italian pronunciation. Francois lent his court, his army, and his collection some of his own vigorous momentum. He was founder of the French National Collection, which he accumulated at his new chateau at Fontainebleau. He recruited Italian artists to provide decorations which transformed the somewhat rustic building into the chief monument of the Renaissance style outside Italy. A little bit more about his relationship to these artists. There's an image. Charles X distributing awards to the artists exhibiting at the Salon of 1824 at the Louvre, January 1825. It's a dramatic image, isn't it? With all these paintings crammed together. Looks like it could be Napoleon here. The history of art in France is so closely linked to the history of France. There's a lot to cover. Just a little bit about how the different rulers of France impacted the Louvre and its collection. Here's another painting by Samuel F.B. Morse. And this is a painting of the Salon Carré. This is really neat. So we're in this room here. But look at this little portal into a hallway. And then we have these figures working on paintings. Pretty cool. Here's a little bit about that painting. In 1832, Samuel F.B. Morse, the American painter and inventor of the telegraphic code, finished a picture to which he had devoted 14 months. Wow. The gallery of the Louvre shows the Salon Carré, and beyond it through the doorway, the immense perspective of the Grande Galerie. Okay, so that portal we were talking about here, that's the Grande Galerie. With this, I think these are windows here, like skylights. I love how hazy it looks. The walls of the salon are crowded from wainscot to cornice with more than 40 of the greatest, most central masterpieces in the collection. Yeah, a painting like this, which is not only just a painting, but a painting of 40 masterworks. You can see why it took that long, because it's so hard to paint another painting, especially a famous one. Well, but some of these do look familiar, don't they? Morse's picture was intended instructively to demonstrate the concentrated essence of Western painting. The intention of this book